begin in three, two, one. Welcome to Never Too Late, Real Stories of Reinvention, where we share the stories of dream chasers, career changers, and people with the courage to reinvent themselves. I'm Eric Cooter, and each episode I'll sit down with someone who has taken a leap, discovered a new path, or found joy in the unexpected. These conversations are about hope, resilience, and reminding us all that it's never too late to chase your dreams. Well, welcome to episode 1. I have a lineup of so many wonderful guests that are going to be upcoming over the next several weeks. We'll have 3 episodes launch today. And then we'll have one every 2 weeks after that, and then hopefully over time we'll have an opportunity to speak with more people. So I just want to welcome you today, and thanks for being a part of this journey. So today I want to share a little bit about my story, not because it's perfect or anything special, but because I think it's a reminder that it's never too late to go after the things that you've been dreaming about. I think my dream of being a professional pilot began early on when I was really young. Even before I started taking flying lessons, I used to build model airplanes, and my dad actually had a deep love of aviation, and I think that had a great deal of influence on me. I think a lot of times when I was a kid, my dad knew folks that were pilots, and he'd get a chance to take a ride in their airplane, and I'd get to tag along. So aviation was something that I shared with my father, and something that I really loved early on. Um, I started flying when I was only 15 years old. My dad started taking lessons again in, I think it was 1980, yes. And he took lessons from a woman named Evelyn Bryan Johnson in Morristown, Tennessee, which was probably about 25 miles from where we grew up. We had a perfectly wonderful little airport in the town I grew up in, but um, for some reason, Dad went to Morristown, and I learned later why. Evelyn Johnson was an aviation legend. She was a FAA designated examiner. She had an airline transport pilot certificate. She was a certified flight instructor, instrument, and multi-engine. She was also a commercial helicopter pilot and also a commercial helicopter flight instructor as well. Um, Evelyn has won so many, bless her heart, she's gone now, of course, but Evelyn is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as having logged the most flight hours of any human, I believe, 57,000 hours. That's incredible. Um, she also was designated as the FAA Flight Instructor of the Year back in the 80s, I think it was. If you ever go to Sevierville, Tennessee, Evelyn's there's a museum there in honor of Evelyn Bryan Johnson, and she had a deep influence on me as well as my father. Um, so Dad and I started taking flying lessons together in Morristown. And I remember the first day that he actually invited me to consider it. He was taking his lessons. I was sitting in the FBO, the office, and reading flying magazines and watching videos. And my dad walked in after a lesson, and Evelyn looked at me and she said, "Well, Eric, are you ever going to take flying lessons?" And my dad said, "Yes, he is. Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Yes." So they put me on the schedule after that. Uh, Needless to say, that's a long story, but I spent from age 15 to 16, actually from 15 to 17, working on my private pilot's license. And one of the things that I had the most pride in as a young, kind of quiet, shy guy in high school is that I actually soloed in an airplane, took my first flight by myself on my 16th birthday. I actually soloed in an airplane before I ever got my driver's license, and I still remember the car examiner where I got my driver's license. My dad told her that this should be easy. He's already soloed in an airplane, and so when she met me, she says, "Your dad tells me that you already flown an airplane. This should be a breeze for you." And I said, "No, ma'am, it won't be." But I did get my driver's license as well. So long story short, after I soloed, I did all my other training and eventually got my private pilot's license. and flew some of my friends around, including a lot of my family members. But things soon changed after that, after I went to college. I dreamed of being an Air Force fighter pilot. Um, I was very involved in Civil Air Patrol as a young kid. I actually got to go to Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi, where they train pilots and spend a week with Civil Air Patrol, learning how Air Force pilots are trained, and that really set in me this desire to be a pilot. And but things didn't work out that for me. I learned when I was doing my first class or my medical exam to get my solo certificate that I have an eye condition. I have defective color vision. And at the time, that both knocked me out of military flying, but it also had an impact on my ability to actually fly professionally. That was really disheartening, and I felt really lost. And I hoped that maybe if I could have gotten in the Air Force Academy, I could kind of get past that. But I never really got the appointment, and I wound up going instead of University of Tennessee, where I wanted to go and get an Air Force ROTC scholarship. I wound up attending East Tennessee State University, where where I received a bachelor in business administration. Thought that was a nice generic general degree that I could use for a lot of different things. But as a kid, I thought my life was going to look like this. I mean, I was a kid, I was a teenager, but I kind of hit some adversity that I couldn't control. I had a physical situation that couldn't control, and yet at the same time, I persevered on and continued on. Um, I was a little disillusioned as well. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I got married really young in college. Um, in college, I got out of school and took my first job with a small chamber of commerce for a while, doing some marketing and training for folks. Eventually, I was accepted into the national training program for Sears, Sears Roebuck and Company, not Cirrus, but Sears Roebuck and Company. That was a pretty competitive thing, and I wound up being a national trainee with them. And after training, I got my first assignment in management in a small store in Mississippi. Ironically, I went back to Columbus, Mississippi. I was only there for 11 months, and I got promoted to a store in Birmingham, Alabama, a larger store, and did really well, I thought. I really worked hard, and actually, that position in Birmingham led to a visit from some buyers and merchandise managers from national headquarters, and they saw some of the things that I was doing. And it wasn't long after that that I was promoted to the buying office outside Chicago in Hoffman Estates. I actually went to Sears corporate headquarters, and that went well. I had a couple of bumps in the road in my career, of my own doing, not because I just made some decisions that I don't always think were smart ones at the time. But um, however, during that time, I wasn't flying at all. I actually had quit flying soon after I got my private pilot's license, and yet that bug was still there. I'd still look at in the heavens and see airplanes, and my heart was drawn to the sky, but I just wasn't flying. Um, During some of that time, I had gotten married, had my first child, had some issues in our marriage. It wasn't working out. Wound up getting a divorce. And then I met a wonderful woman who I've been married to now for 26 years. When we were in Chicago, we went to an air show in Lake in the Hills Airport. And I still remember walking around those airplanes. And I think Terry, my wife, saw something in me that she knew was a spark in me. She knew I always still had these model airplanes, and I dreamed of flying and talked about flying a lot. And she said, "You really love it, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to try to get back to it someday." And she said, "That's what I'm going to get you for your birthday. I want you to get to become active in flying again." And and so she, for my birthday, introduced me to a flight school where I met a wonderful woman who had an airplane at a get grass strip up in Harvard, Illinois. And I went and met with her, and um, she looked at my logbook and took me up for a flight. And she said, "You still have the skills. It's going to take a little while to get you back up to speed." So I had to spend, about 10 hours getting back up to speed where I could fly again. And eventually she gave me a flight review. I had some struggles with my medical during that time, just some things going on. Then I eventually got my third class medical certificate. And then it was after that that I flew every single weekend that I could. Um, and that experience set in me and reignited a passion for aviation that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Um, and I think that was probably where I made one of my first transitions, or where that spark started to happen. Um, uh, my career in my career in retail was going really well. I had been promoted to associate buyer. I was the associate buyer for cookware and cutlery and bakeware and housewares, and I love that stuff because I love cooking and I was just kind of in my moment. But um, I really wanted to explore aviation in a deeper way and get some additional ratings. So eventually, we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, because I accepted a position with a regional retailer as a buyer. And it was a very difficult company and a good move, though. But it was there that I actually started flying with Civil Air Patrol again and started working on my instrument rating. Um, the regional retailer that I went to was going through its own struggles, and it was nowhere close to the wonderful experience we had at Sears. Very competitive, really struggling to redefine itself. Had just gone into the home business, buying offering cookware and bedding and things like that. But they were really struggling, and management was difficult. And at about that time, my wife, Terry, we kind of had this desire to go back to Florida, to be close to her father. Her father was getting older, and she really wanted to try to connect with her dad again, and his health was declining quite a bit. So we made a very difficult decision. Terry was also working for this regional retailer as an assistant buyer. I was a buyer, she was an assistant buyer. And she decided to go back into the stores in Florida. And so I also left my position on the premise that I wanted to finish up flying and pursue my dream finally. And so we did. We sold everything. We moved to Florida. Um, Terry got an opportunity to be with her dad for 2 years and help him through that transition. Of course, he passed away, but during that time, she was working in the stores as a sales manager for a regional retailer. Eventually became an assistant store manager with another retailer, and then eventually a store manager, which she loved. And she discovered her own gifts for remodeling and redesigning and starting new stores. And she did really great with one of the companies that she went to work for. And during that time, I was actually flying, and I finished up my instrument rating. I got my commercial pilot certificate, my flight instructor certificate, my certified flight instructor instrument rating, and I got my commercial multi-engine license and started teaching full time. And a lot of people don't realize this, but being a flight instructor is not one of the most lucrative careers you can have. It's really a bridge career, unless you're doing something else and you just love to teach, which I do. Um, but I was not really able to provide for us the way we wanted to live. And about that same time, 9/11 happened, and the aviation industry took a really, really difficult turn. And it was during that time that soon after her father passed away, that Terry and I really felt a desire to reconnect with our faith community. We found this wonderful congregation near our home and became very involved in the church at about the same time 9/11 happened, and my um, discomfort with or not knowing or really being discouraged because the aviation industry was going through a difficult time. It was about that time that I discovered that I had gifts for ministry. And maybe that was the connection back to the years of working with people in retail and dealing with difficult situations and customer service and caring for people in their situation. I don't know, but I became very active in this congregation. Eventually, they asked me to serve on the board of directors, and I wound up being the treasurer for the church. And eventually, they asked me if I felt called to ordain ministry. Well, I thought that was kind of funny because I always had that stirring of some sort, I guess, in my life. And then a dear friend of mine that became kind of like my spiritual friend during that time had also seen that call and mentioned it to me. And I thought they were in collaboration with one another, but really they weren't. So they saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And I think that's the people in our lives that help us to understand what our call is, or what our vocation really is, or what our dream is, or what we want to do, or those people that see in us things we don't often see in ourselves. So anyway, I went through the process of discernment in the Episcopal Church. Being a priest or deacon or anyone ordained in those two orders in the church tradition I'm a part of, you don't just say, "Hey, I want to be a clergy person." It's what we call discernment or holy listening in community with others, where others listen to your story and your sense of call, and they either affirm that you're called to ordained ministry or you're called to something else. And so I did a local discernment group who listened to my story, and sure enough, they affirmed they thought I had a call to ordained ministry. And then I became involved at the diocesan level with a discernment program, and they affirmed they thought I had a call. And then I met with the Commission on Ministry, a lot of clergy and lay people of the diocese from other congregations who listened to your story, and sure enough, they affirmed they thought I had a call. Then I met with the bishop, and he too thought I had a call to ordained ministry. Well, it was from that call that I was sent to seminary. I attended the University of the South, also known as Sewanee, in Sewanee, Tennessee. It's a beautiful campus on the Cumberland Plateau. Beautiful place, owned by 28 dioceses of the Episcopal Church. And that's where I spent 3 years in community working on a Master's of Divinity. Um, Terry had the opportunity to open a brand new store in Huntsville, Alabama. So it was going to be difficult for us to live on campus. We needed to live off campus so I could commute to Sewanee and she could commute to Huntsville. So we found a little town called Fayetteville, Tennessee, and we found a local church there and we became very involved there. And it was there that I discovered I had other gifts for leadership and helping people to come into community together. And we met some really dear friends, friends that we have during that time where it was very difficult. We were on one income, um, but it was wonderful. Long story short, my ministry from that point, I was called to serve a church as priest in charge right out of seminary. That's not the normal process in the Episcopal Church. Normally, you go work under the tutelage of an experienced priest for maybe 2 years, and then you get your first church. But the bishop put me in a church that was struggling, to say the least, but I learned so much from them. And soon during that time, for almost 3 years, I served in that church. And then I wound up serving on the bishop's staff. And I initially started working on how to develop some local communities that were different from other churches. That didn't quite work out the way I hoped. It was a bit of a disappointment. Um, but at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to hone some other skills. I started working under the tutelage of a great mentor, another one of those people that come in your lives and sees in you gifts that you can't see in yourself. And he helped me to discover that my administrative and business and creative background could be used in other areas of the church. So I started helping him with what they call transition ministry, or where congregations are either going through some conflict and they need someone to come in and work with them, or they just had a change in clergy. Their priest accepted another call, or they were retiring and now the church needed to find leadership. And in a sense, it's like being an HR manager for the diocese and for the bishop. You help the church go out and recruit new clergy candidates in the interview process and the whole discernment process that they go through. And I got to do that, and I learned so much, and I really enjoyed it. It was wonderful working with congregations in those moments. And I also did some conflict intervention stuff for the bishop, and that was a gift that I thought I had, to go in and help a congregation heal from difficult situations. Um, And I was also working in the ordination process itself. I had just gone through it. So now I was actually helping people through that process to navigate through the ins and outs of what it means to discern. I loved the ministry I was doing. I could work with a lot of different people, and a lot of the gifts I had before came forward, and I had a lot of mentors along the way. Now, don't think that aviation went off the table because remember, I told you after I got my license back up to speed with my flight review, not a week went by that I wasn't flying. I was very active in Civil Air Patrol. I was flying with them. I was a flight instructor with them, helping others to get ready to fly with Civil Air Patrol. I was doing some instruction, even in seminary. I was teaching a little bit as a flight instructor. Aviation still did not go away. It was still tugging at my heart. I still wanted to find a way to fly professionally at some point. Maybe retirement was what I was thinking. I'll retire at 65 and go back and do some kind of professional flying. I'll do an instructor position teaching people how to fly. Um, Working for the bishop was great, but I sensed working with one of the congregations I was helping through transition that I really felt like I was being called back to parish ministry again to kind of test my wings as being a pastor to people every day in the church life. And like I said, the church was going through some difficult times. And so I asked the bishop if I could discern a call with them. And sure enough, they called me as their rector. That's the priest in charge position, they call that. It's an old English word. Um, and I served this church for 2 years, even through COVID. The church did well. We grew. We repaired the roof that had been damaged from one of the hurricanes and had not been addressed. We were growing quickly. We were starting a youth program. We were getting our bills in alignment. Our finances were good. It felt really good, and we loved it. And then out of the blue one day, that mentor that I had, that person that sees gifts in me that I can't see in myself, calls me up and says, um, Eric, I know you know a lot of people in the church. Do you know anyone that would be a good match for to be considered to be the canon to the ordinary now? That position is actually the assistant to the bishop. It's not like a chief of staff job. It's more like their primary helper. Um, they take care of a lot of different things the bishop doesn't normally want to need to get involved in, but needs someone to deal with those things. And it's really a very interesting position. My friend always thought that I was uniquely gifted for that. But anyway, my friend calls me out of the blue and says, "Do you know anyone that's interested maybe in applying to be the next canon of the ordinary in this diocese?" And I said, "No, Michael, I'll think about it. I really can't think of anyone." And he goes, "Well, I can." And I said, "Well, why are you calling me?" And he said, "Because it's you." And I went, Michael, I live 15 minutes from the most beautiful beach in Florida. I live less than 15 minutes from some of the best restaurants. We have a beautiful pool home. I got a great church that I serve. My wife is happy. Why would we leave? And he said, because I think you should look at this. You're gifted for it. And we did. And I was called to serve as the new bishop's canon to the ordinary. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I was able to help this new bishop through the first 2 years, which is always difficult for a new bishop because remember they used to be a priest in a church, but now they're in charge of a diocese. Our diocese in Oklahoma had almost 70 churches all across the state, parochial schools all across the state, retirement villages, a huge camp and conference center. It wasn't just a few churches. This was a big responsibility for this new bishop, and I was able to be there with him and during COVID. Um, but I think I had the gifts that were important in that time for him. I don't think aviation went off the table because I was still flying as much as I could, even in that state of where the winds are pretty high. I flew as much as I could. But man, things were still stirring in me about aviation and 9/11 changed me and COVID changed all of us. I started thinking about what was most important in life. My wife and I being 3 days away from family by car. Um, we're in the middle of COVID. It's hard to make friends. Um, we both have a few health issues, Terry more than me, and I discovered that I had a little bit of a health problem that I didn't know about before. And about that same time, I met someone who was very active in aviation all of his life. He was an incredible man, had worked as a director of aviation for a large oil company. We're flying Gulf Streams all over the world. And now he was an instructor in Civil Air Patrol and was giving me my check ride to fly in that state. We became friends instantly. We connected because his story and my story intersected. And I learned that when we went to lunch one day. And he said to me, Eric, you love aviation. I said, yes. He said, I have too. And he says, you're dreaming about it, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he says, God gifts all of us with a dream on our hearts. And I know you have one, and I'd like to help you achieve it. That was one. I had another friend that at about the same time, um, calls me up out of the blue, and we were in flight instructors together. And he says to me, when are you coming back to aviation? And I said, well, I've got 5 or 6 more years of work before I do that. And he said, well, don't wait too long. If you really ever think about coming back to aviation, I can help you find a job. It's two. Then a third calls me and says the same thing, and even connects me with a company who eventually offered me a job. Mine. And then my first flight student, who I'm going to feature as a guest, calls me up one day and said to me, Eric, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm working. I'm doing my ministry. Are you flying? Yeah, every day. Every weekend I get a chance. Not every day. Every weekend I get a chance. I'm in the air. Good, good, good. He said, if you ever want to come back to aviation, let me know. He said, I'd hire you next week. And I said, doing what? Washing airplanes? And he goes, no, we have a first officer program. The company I've got, an SIC program. We can get you an SIC type rating and an Embraer Phenom 300. And then a year later, we'll try to send you off to get your PIC type. And eventually you'll upgrade to captain. So if you're ever interested, let me know. Are you serious? I asked. He said, absolutely. Now, we were thinking about early retirement because we were 3 days by car from family. We just come through COVID and it was difficult. And I expressed a desire to live life fully, even in difficult times. So I asked my friend, are you sure you're being serious? And he goes, absolutely. We'll fly you down here. And they did. And they interviewed me and they offered me the job. And then I had to make a huge decision, because I don't know how long my health's going to last. I don't know if I'll be able to be healthy enough to fly when I turn 65 when I retire, or 67 when I retire. And I have the opportunity of a lifetime now to do something I've dreamed about since I was 15 years old. How do I retire from vocation that I love, that I'm called to? Well, the decision was difficult, but one that I knew that I never regretted and that I needed to do. And my wife needed to be closer to family. Her health was not exactly great. In fact, she was struggling with some things as well as the thing that I discovered that didn't keep me from flying, but it was certainly something that woke me up to how fragile life is and how short it can be and how much we need to get out there and chase our dreams. And so we did. We moved to Florida. We bought a house. Terry was retired. Um, I started flying and traveled all over the U.S. flying this Phenom 300 with experienced captains, both left seat and right seat, and learning so much, and realized that I was gifted to do this. And I loved it. A year later, they did. They sent me off to CAE in Dallas. I got my PIC type rating. I got my airline transport pilot certificate. I came back. I upgraded eventually to captain. I guess junior captain's what I would call it. Still doing some PIC, pilot and command flying, but always uh, to these wonderful places: California, Canada, the Bahamas, Grand Turk, uh, um, Costa Rica, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, all over the Caribbean. I got to fly to all these places, all over the eastern seaboard of the United States, to the Midwest, to Dallas, all the way out to California. It was just amazing. But I told an old friend of mine, I said, I don't think that life is static. I think there's always going to be changes. And I think one of the things people say, well, you keep doing things, you keep moving. And I'm like, no, I'm constantly open to when transition comes because it's in those transitions that we learn. And so I had an opportunity to work for another charter company, but this had a different mission. I was actually doing some life-saving flying, and I was really excited about it, making a lot more money. Could live anywhere for the most part I wanted to, but the problem is that the lifestyle of being away from home from my wife for 8 days, literally flying out on one day and coming back 8 days later, and then only having 6 days with her, and then repeating that over and over again was not appealing to me because I love my wife. I value being at home. It worked well with the other charter company, but this was not going to work. So I needed to find another opportunity because staying in Naples um, was going to be a shifting proposition for us because Terry's mother lives in a city where we live now, about less than 2 hours north of us, and we needed to be closer to her. She's 91, and we wanted to be closer to her. Again, moving for family reasons, and so I talked to a friend of mine who recommended I look at a major training company in the Savannah area that teaches people to fly jets, Gulfstream jets, and I applied, and they hired me, and now I'm a fully qualified instructor pilot for them, and looking hopefully for the opportunity to do some contract flying on the Gulfstream G280 aircraft, and while I'm teaching others to chase their dream. Um, I hope to be able to start flying with folks doing that. I've had an opportunity, but I'm taking that opportunity as well to, while I still work for this major training company. But I don't think my transition's over yet. My wife and I are certain we don't want to leave Savannah again. This is going to be our final, I hope, place to live. But I do think there's more to come. I'm sensing a desire to help others find their dream. I'm doing some coaching on the side, some pro bono coaching. I'm helping some younger pilots who are really interested in flying and just being a coach to them, not formally, just encouraging them and trying to make connections for them and trying to explore my own sense of to be a coach and a mentor for others. And then this idea of this podcast came about. And what I found was is when I reached out to friends of mine, I said, "You have an incredible story. You have been an inspiration to me, and I know you've been an inspiration to others. And I want to ask you, are you willing to share that story with me on a podcast?" And I've had 8, 9 people respond. And you're going to get to hear their stories. You're going to get to hear from my friend Paul, who was my first flight student 25 years ago. You're going to hear from a priest that I helped mentor and helped her get started in her ministry. You're going to hear from another priest that I connected with who was a military chaplain, who our lives intersected in my military chaplaincy with Civil Air Patrol. You're going to hear from a young man that I've been talking to who's actually achieved his lifelong dream as well as an SIC on an aircraft, and other priests and people in other vocations who have actually rediscovered who they are and reinvented themselves and continue to be open every single day to what might be next. So if you're wondering if it's too late to do something different, it never is. That's what inspires me about doing this podcast is I want to see people live their dream, do the things they want to do. And so I hope that as you join the podcast, listening in, that you're inspired to go out and do the things that you want to do. And if you have, please let me know at ecooter@gmail.com. And my web address is ericcooter.com. This podcast is going to be featured on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also find videos of the interviews and conversations on our YouTube channel. And we'll put links to both of those in the show notes. So if I could offer you one encouragement to go out and do the things you want to do, this is what it would be. Never give up. You may be doing other things. You may have to take a detour. You may have to take a job that you don't really like. But if you look at it as an opportunity to learn and a time to build skill, and you never lose sight of what you want to do, and you're staying connected with others who can help you find your way, then you can get your dream. And you can live a life of fulfillment and joy, which is what I think, for a moment, to be a priest again is what God's called each of us to do, is to be joyful and be a witness of love in our lives to others. So thanks for joining the podcast. I hope it's an inspiration to you. And don't forget, go out there and chase your dream. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.